This build really kicked my butt, both physically and mentally. It's my first large-scale attempt at wood carving, kind of in a John Malecki style. Well, without the tools, experience, team, and workshop. And as another first, this video is a paid partnership with BetterHelp. It is important to me that you know that everything that I wrote in this video was written long before I got the sponsorship offer. I want to tell you some things about myself that I've not mentioned in public before. But if you just want to watch the milling process, feel free to mute me at any time. But hopefully in showing you this project, I will inspire you to not only start carving, but if you experience anything like me, I hope to inspire you to talk as well. Here's the first thing. I feel an unbelievable amount of pressure when I take on a woodworking project. And it does take its toll. I don't know if other people feel the same way. I hadn't even noticed that my mental health was at a low point, and what should have been a new challenge and a really enjoyable build ended up bringing up anxieties and negative feelings that I didn't even know I had. And the majority of it stems from that pressure that I put on myself. I'm sure you can relate. And that pressure started to build right at the very start, the wood. This is my first time buying rough cut wood. And to add to that, this is the most I've ever spent on one single project. And after inspecting them, I realised that every board had either a twist or a bow in it. And these all had to be taken out before I could joint the boards to then glue them into one larger panel. Now, when you watch my last video, you'll realise why I've made all the jigs that I've made recently. So while I mill this timber, I hope you'll indulge me while I tell you about some of the other pressures I felt during this project. Firstly, this is a gift for my wife, which is terrifying. It's a big birthday, and what I'm making today is genuinely the only thing that I could think about getting. Now, I probably could have got past that if I wasn't making something that was going to be displayed in the house for everybody who visits the house to see. And not in an infrequently used room, in the kitchen, of all places. So here's my truth, and none of this has been added for video purposes. My aim, in pure honesty here, is motivated by what I think the YouTuber woodworking space is lacking most. You'll see hundreds upon hundreds of polished videos, and many don't show you their mistakes, which do happen, but also they never talk about the difficulties that they experience within themselves along the route. And that's the change that I want to make. I think it's vital that you know that a 20-minute video that looks polished when it's put together for you to watch actually took hours to make and plan, and probably caused your favourite maker a huge amount of anxiety and stress along the way. And not so that you appreciate us anymore, but more so you know when you experience it, you're not alone. So here's some more facts. Fact 1. I actually became a YouTubing woodworker because selling my work absolutely terrified me. It was fine for a while, but as I started making more expensive items, the fear of the piece actually falling apart made it impossible for me to confidently make anything of value that you would call a commission piece. And I can mark the exact moment when this happened. I'd spent weeks making 4 end-grain chessboards. Back then, I had nothing more than a cheap drill and a sanding disc. Jumped to 2 months later, and they were ruined by wood movement. Or rather, my naivety and not accounting for it. I couldn't face that happening to a customer that I'd sold a piece to, and so I started filming my work and hoping that would fund my hobby instead. Here's fact 2. I only gift to family members. So the fact that this is going to be displayed in my house for all visitors to see, well that causes me anxiety. And everything else that I've made to date lives in a cupboard in my house. But I'm working on it. And I hope that in telling you this piece today becomes a turning point. On one hand, it's easy to say, don't let things going wrong stop you from selling your work. But honestly, I know that that wouldn't have worked for me at the time. And I also know how silly I felt being a woodworker who genuinely couldn't sell their work, or even show it to people for fear of the fact they'd point out some of the flaws, or worse, compliment it, and I wouldn't know how to answer. And if you've listened to me this far, I thank you. Because genuinely, without knowing it, you've helped. And now the wood is flat, we can get back onto the build. With any build like this, the next step is choosing your grain orientation. And it was at this point that I realised that 2 of the boards were actually taken side by side from the exact same slab. And I'm not sure if I made the right choice here, but I lined them back up to give the grain some sort of continuity. With the choices made, it's now jointing time to prepare for a panel glue up. And this is where the project nearly got scrapped for the first time. I spent a long time making a jointing jig for my table saw. Why? Well, because I don't have a jointer. And the jointing plane that I'd usually use to joint both edges together, well, it's not wide enough to cover both boards. And there is no way that I am skilled enough to do each board individually to get a nice tight joint. Except, I actually am. And I've done it before. But for some reason, with the pressure that I've already put on this build, I let myself believe that I couldn't. Anyway, I opted for the up-down method on the table saw. And the easiest way to explain this is that you label each side of each joint with up and down on opposing sides. So when you pass the board through your table saw, taking the thinnest possible cut, you face them in the label direction. The idea being that if your table saw is not perfectly set up, any angle of the blade that isn't 90 will be opposed on the opposite side of the joint and will cancel itself out. And while I do this, please let me take 1 minute out of your time to tell you about this week's paid partnership. You are the first people that I've told about my struggles, and I know that I'm not alone in them. We don't tell people. We carry that burden alone so as not to worry our family and friends. I have made no secret about woodworking being my safe space. It's always been my escape from my everyday stresses. But slowly, over time, and in part due to making videos, which I love, my sawdust therapy has slowly but surely lost its effect. And that's why I am genuinely going to start to talk to someone, a professional. I'm going to try and unload some of that burden so that I can enter my workshop refreshed. It's not an easy choice, but the more we talk about it, the easier it gets for the next people. And that's important. And this is why I'm excited to have BetterHelp as a paid partnership. They take away the barriers, pairing you usually within 48 hours of completing a questionnaire with a credentialed therapist who's trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. I've popped a link below and in the description so you can check it out yourself. It can all be done from the comfort of your own home via phone or computer. You can call, video chat or message. So thank you, BetterHelp. I confess this is the first time I've used a table saw for jointing. The joints are okay, mostly tight but not perfect. There was an argument for taking a hand plane to fine-tune them before gluing them up. But as the gaps were mainly towards one end, leaving me enough usable space on the panel, I decided to settle for it. The overall finish of the panel is also not 100%, but as I'll be carving this, I'm not too worried. Did I mention before that I was going to be carving this? Well, after all this prep, I can finally tell you, show you what I'm actually going to make. I have a fairly decent space in the kitchen that I need to fill. And after a failed attempt at making some interesting wall lights, I've decided to make a carved arty panel to fill the space instead. Not a simple shelf like I really should do. No, instead a real test of my skills and tools that's going to be a constant reminder of why I don't make gifts for other people. But I've already told you my reasoning here. It could also be the piece that puts to bed all of that for the future. So here's my inspiration. Don't I look deep and arty? I made this box recently and I loved it. The video was a flop, but the box is one of my all-time favourites. It now belongs to my wife and she commented on how much she loved the design. Me, I like the folds and the flow that make the wood appear like fabric. And so I want to make a larger one. Almost an exact copy for the wall. And I'm not just trying to make a cool video shot here. I'm actually seeing how the light plays on it. And where the grain flows. As you'll see in a second, that could cause an issue. You see, I think that the box works so well as the grain was mainly all horizontal. This larger panel is affected by the one piece with the circular grain patterns, and I really don't know if that will derail the entire result. Sapele's a really busy grained wood, and that helps as much as it hinders, to be honest. But let me know in the comments what you think on this one. Would you have cut the board off and replaced it now with a straighter grain? Maybe then see at the end if you still feel the same way. For better or worse, I've decided to try and feature it and see if the grain pattern splits into each of the segments on the carving. And I'm going to mark it up almost identical to how the box was laid out. To be honest, with all the pressures I've already put on this project, the fact that the design is already done for me is actually one less to worry about. And I've also got to be careful not to carve too deep and create a hole. Now, this is a clunky solution, but this screw is set to around 2/3 the depth of the panel itself, and the long piece of sapele that it's set into lets me reference off any of the high spots that are left on the board. My only dimensional concern here is to get the most out of the panel, avoiding the loose joint end while holding that golden ratio in mind. That's the ratio of length to width that makes boxes pleasing to the eye. And now you can see what I'm working with. But my fear of wood movement, my chessboard heartbreak, was still going strong. So I came up with what I hope is going to be a solution. In truth, it was the solution for the box, only larger. A simple frame and panel arrangement, never fixing the whole panel to the frame so it can still expand and contract. After a few tests to get the right depth of cut to leave a 1/3 tenon round all edges, I made a series of passes on the table saw, adjusting the fence away by the kerf of the blade each time. Now you'll need a sacrificial fence for the first cut so as not to damage the table saw fence. And don't forget to do top and bottom before moving the fence to the next cut. It's a really easy process, far easier than a router in my opinion, unless you have a larger, more stable router table than me. And then I've just got to make the frame. I'm not going to show you the whole of the frame build because honestly, it's just an oak frame to go around the outside. The idea here is that it won't still focus from the piece itself, so I'm not going to let it still focus from the video, but I will show it you at the end. The only important bit is that you have a groove running the length of it to hold the tenon of the panel itself. And the groove needs to be just slightly deeper than the tenon is long. That just allows the panel to move around how it needs to, hopefully. And now for the carving part. And I was really looking forward to this bit. And bear in mind, I've got some tools for the job, but not all that many. It dawned on me that actually an angle grinder and a Festool Rotex style sander would have been absolutely perfect for this job. But I have neither. And I refuse to buy anything new just for this one project. What I do have is a die grinder and some cut saw burrs. The burrs are tiny though compared to the overall panel size. Suddenly this blank canvas feels a lot larger. But it didn't stop the dreamer in me kicking in. And that's the guy who desperately wants to be accepted as a real woodworker. So I picked up my chisel, gouge. I really should figure out the right name if I'm gonna get accepted. Anyway, I picked up the one with the bevel on the underside to act in a scooping motion. And I just started to try and hog out some of the wood. And I will say this, if you don't want sawdust flying around, and if you have neighbours who complain about noise, and if you have plenty of time on your hands, then this is so satisfying and tactile. But after an hour and 2 resharpens, my arm was numb and the finish was just so bumpy. I couldn't see a way that I'd get this all done by hand within the time constraints, because birthdays don't wait. So I picked up my die grinder. For anybody who hasn't seen one of these before, it has one job. It spins. No speed control, no gears, and no clutch. Like a router, you move against the spin to maintain control, and you just adjust the style of cut with pressure and using different burrs. I've got a mixture of coarse and fine and some flappy sanding wheels, which will save me later, but I'll get onto that. I'm not going to show you the entire minute-by-minute account, but the changes happen relatively quickly, and this initial cut gives you pretty instant results. That said, the finish isn't great, and if I'm honest, with my skills, the fine and the coarse burrs, they all did a very similar job. I still had the chessboard lesson ringing in my ears every single day. So after working on the piece, I returned it back to the 2 end frames to hopefully avoid any cupping. You never really know what removing a lot of wood all at once can do here. Often the wood in the deeper areas still holds more moisture than the outer layers, and when you release that and it dries, then the panel can cup. And sadly it did. I can't tell you how frustrated I was at that moment, gutted in fact. I won't go into too much detail, but the fear of the project getting ruined at this point really started to bug me, especially through the hours and hours of hand sanding and card scraping. I don't know if you find this, but sometimes the monotony of sanding can give you a lot of time to think. Positive or negative thoughts. Again, with honesty in mind, fact number 4. From this moment on, I've decided to integrate music and/or podcasts into my sanding process. It feels like a really small, insignificant thing to mention. But if anybody else experiences this and they make a positive change, then 2 seconds has been worth it. It's going to mean that hopefully this video will benefit at least 3 people. Me, the person who listened and made the positive change, and my wife, if she likes the gift, if she ever gets the gift. As you can see here, all of the carving has to be done outside. There's just no way I could attempt this in my tiny workshop. And after one full pass with the grinder on the panel, I decided to try out these flappy sanding wheels. You see, these were far too big to use on the box, but I definitely missed them. They clean up the rough finish better than anything I've ever tried. It's worth noting that this particular die grinder needs a different size collet for something like this wheel than it does for the cut saw burrs. I think that comes from the fact that one of these is imperial and one of these is metric. But in taking back all of that rough finish, you suddenly get a really good look at the overall piece. And it was not great. So after what is probably about 5 hours of carving, it's still not what I wanted. It's not the vision that I had in my head, and I know it's identical to the box, but I had a different idea of where I wanted this to go. It doesn't feel deep enough. Also, I'm not sure if these ring patterns coming through from the bottom piece of wood we used, I don't know if those are going to do me good or if those are going to ruin the design, because if this is on a wall, these are going to be the first bits you see at sort of eye level. That could be a problem. I've made an on-the-spot decision. I'm going to take these deeper. I'm going to go in with the cut saw burr, and then I'm going to go back in with a flappy wheel to really try and get some definition running through the bottoms of these trenches. It's really hard to push yourself to go back and repeat the first step on anything. But if what you're making is not where you want it to be, then it is kinder on yourself to do it, even if it means more work. I was quite aggressive with my carving here, including with the sanding wheels, really focusing on increasing the depth from the centre of each of the segments. So I'm going to be honest with you at this point, I'm probably about 40% happy with where we're at. But what I know from the box is that this is the most important stage. This, the sanding, the actual finish, because once all the scarring lines have disappeared and you start to get that scraper in there, you really start to get a flow on the wood. Like any project you do, break it into bite-sized chunks. For this, it's a really simple decision. I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. So let's scrape and sand and shape. I mentioned right at the start here that this was as physically demanding as it was mentally demanding. And I'll spare you all the details of the hours of footage, but I will show you some key moments. I started off thinking that a few hours of scraping would suffice and lead me straight into the sanding. But I'd failed to look at the pieces in different lights. When I inspected it with a bright white filming light, I saw that the lines I'd made with the die grinder and the basic shape of the piece were covered in lumps and bumps. And you just can't straighten these easily with just a card scraper. I didn't want to go back to the grinder again, as I wasn't even sure that I could get these straighter with that, because I didn't in the first place. I was genuinely gutted. And so I chose the easiest segment, the one with the straightest grain. And then I started carving away the lumps and undulations with a chisel and finished it up with some 80 grit sandpaper. And then another check. No better. There were blemishes, bumps and scarring from every single tool that I'd used so far. This was already an hour or more of trying, and I was really tempted to just scrap the project at this stage. So I went for an even smaller area. And I managed to get this absolutely perfect, but that just managed to draw focus to all of the other areas around it that weren't perfect. So finally I took one last look and knew it was time for a break. There are times in projects like this where I tend to get obsessive. And I know I do it, but I failed to spot it early enough. I was tired, frustrated and sorely in need of a win. But a win here wasn't even possible, not really from where I was. So I came back the next morning with an idea, a change of mindset. What if I just let the wood flow where it already was? And just do my best with a card scraper to clean up the battle scars and scratches. To smooth the surface, but not change any more of the contours. I worked my way around the piece using every scraper I had. Then came sanding. And this really signalled the start of the end of the project. Quite a milestone. I did what I always do and covered the whole panel in pencil and carefully sanded it off, starting at 80 grit, ensuring I missed nothing. And I promise that this is just luck that I was filming, but here is the moment when you realise that you will get to the finish line after all. When you can finally see success, even if it's not how you initially envisioned it. Don't get me wrong, even at this stage there are hours of sanding ahead, most of it by hand so I get into the grooves and the curves. This foam disc helped me stop the sander making any flat spots, and I also used it for the hand sanding. But after I'd seen every single scratch disappear, I could finally fit the frame. And then add some finish. And now you can see how it ended. I chose spray lacquer for no other reason than I already sanded up to 240 grit, and oil finishes are better with a low grit. And it helps that it has a very easy application. Can't show you the back, as I've hand routed a special message for my wife, and it won't be so special if all of you see it. However, I'm not going to tell her it's there, so this is going to be a bit of a test to see if she actually watches my videos. And please don't switch away too soon, because I just want to say one more thing if I may. I know this isn't my usual style of video. Some will find it preachy, and I get it. But I heard something this week and it really resonated with me. It's Olympics related. You cheer for an athlete all the way through a race, not just at the finish line. So why not do the same for yourself? All the pressure that I piled on myself during this build really sapped the enjoyment out of the process. And I plan to do better on future builds. It's really important to talk. It's not always easy, but it is always worthwhile. Thank you so much for watching, and on a personal note, for listening. On a lighter note, I am looking forward to apologising to people when they see this piece on my wall and start giving me compliments. It's a British thing, don't worry about it. If you've enjoyed this video, please click the like and subscribe, and here is the original video of the box that inspired it all. Thank you so much for watching. If you click, I'll see you over there.